introduce myself. I'm Sara Ashpole from St. Lawrence University in the US, but I'm a longtime Canadian herpetologist. And I feel like I have to say, it is remarkable how the ASG Secretariat and women in science are really dominant in this group. And I just feel like, when I think about the things I'm thankful for and I want to acknowledge, right now I'm just being inundated with the lack of clarity of respect for women in science. And so we are dominating tonight. Not all of us, but pretty close. And that is rare. I am very pleased to say that I have incredible colleagues with the ASG. Chris and I, as co-chairs, were really excited to ask Ariadne to come back into the fold. She's spoken with us before in the past at CHS. And so tonight, this is both an informational and an educational talk, but it's very much a call for action talk too. So Chris and I are going to always be available as longtime CHS members to field questions tonight and moving forward. So without further ado, I'd like to begin this evening's talk. And I think that I will just hand over the screen, Ariadne, to you. Is that okay? Can you do that?
Yeah, that's fine. So first things first, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. We cover all ranges of daylight and nighttime here. Thank you very much to Pamela, Sara, and Kristiina for giving us this opportunity to speak about the Amphibian Conservation Action Plan, or Acap, which we envision to be a roadmap to support amphibian conservation globally. And I would also like to say, Pam, I loved your acknowledgement, and I would like to add ASG's acknowledgement to that too. We have too many people, too many things, too many lives to be thankful for. So thank you very much for that. I would also like to mention to everybody that's with us tonight that I'm very fortunate to have two of our ASG team members with us tonight. Amaël Borzée, who's the deputy chair of ASG Global, and he's based out of Nanjing in China. And we also have Sally Wren, who's the conservation planning officer. She's based out of Christchurch in New Zealand. And I believe we also have one of our close friends joining from Brazil for representing the Amphibian Survival Alliance, Luis Marinho da Fonte. So he might be sort of in the background there, but just to let you know that you have an international contingent with you tonight. So, and I'm based out of Toronto, I should mention, but I do sort of work with on that global scope. So without much further ado, let's get started. Perhaps it's good for us to start doing a little bit of background checking here, background information to those of you who are not necessarily too familiar with the Amphibian Specialist Group. And we need to talk about that before we move on to ACAP. So we'll talk very briefly about what the ASG is, what it does, and how it works. So maybe most of you or many of you have heard about the IUCN, or International Union for Conservation of Nature. This is an international conservation organization which was founded in 1948. And it's not your traditional NGO, let's put it that way. It's basically a bicameral organization that has three main pillars. It's got the members, the secretariat, and the commissions. Members are comprised by organizations, or let's say not individual level, but organizations and agencies. So we have, for example, states and governments, international NGOs, and non-governmental NGOs that can become members, and they pay membership dues and they vote in things that are of importance to IUCN. We then have the secretariat, which are basically staff, employees of IUCN, and they basically organize themselves by global programs, regional offices, and corporate support. And within the global programs, we have the Global Species Program, with which the Species Survival Commission that ASG is under works very closely with. And then the third pillar of IUCN are the commissions. So there's a total of 6 commissions, and each commission basically hosts individuals, people like us, that can provide expertise on particular themes. Out of the 6 commissions, the Species Survival Commission is the largest commission in terms of membership. There's 10,000, around 10,000 members or so. And it hosts 160, over 160 specialist groups, red list authorities, and task forces. So, of which, of course, the ASG is just one of those specialist group. Now, I would like to say, even though we're just one of the 167, I would like to mention that we are the only vertebrate class level specialist group. There's a lot of other vertebrate specialist groups, but they don't organize themselves class level. They organize themselves at taxonomically lower levels. So the SSC is, as I said, a global volunteer specialist network. All the commission members are volunteer experts. And SSC bases itself on science so that it can form conservation action moving forward. Specialist groups are divided into taxonomic groups, taxonomic geographic groups, and thematic groups. So themes like wildlife disease, climate change, or sustainable use are all sort of part of the SSC. And like other commissions, SSC is reconstituted every 4 years in the context of a World Conservation Congress, which is when we have elections for important positions within IUCN. And then what happens is that memberships lapse and all the commissions have to be reconstituted. So everybody who was an ASG member in the previous IUCN quadrennium, 2017 to 2020, will probably know that because they keep getting emails from us bugging them to please renew their membership. So let's talk a little bit more about the ASG itself. So the ASG was created in 2005, following the publication of the Global Amphibian Assessment in 2004, and in the context of an amphibian conservation summit held in 2005 in Washington, DC. The ASG results from the amalgamation of the Declining Amphibian Population Task Force. Some of you may be familiar with that term. It was basically set up in the 90s to investigate enigmatic declines around the world. The Global Amphibian Specialist Group of the day, and the Global Amphibian Assessment. So the ASG became sort of like the new home of these 3 different networks. And the mission of the ASG is to provide the scientific foundation so that we can inform effective amphibian conservation action around the world. It's a global network of volunteer specialists, and we generate the science, capacity, and education on amphibian conservation. We have a website too, IUCN-amphibians.org. And currently our remit is over 8,400 species and counting, because there's one new species described every other day. 263 members worldwide, but this number is going to change because, as I mentioned, we're still in the process of reconstitution, and we have to bring in some people that sort of filled one form but not another. And we have 43 regions. I don't know if you can see this properly. Let me try and quickly talk through this. So each specialist group is organized in a different way. So it's incredibly diverse when you look at how specialist groups operate, how they coordinate themselves, how they organize themselves. But essentially what happens is that the SSC, the Species Survival Commission chair, appoints one or more chairs to a specialist group and appoints a red list authority coordinator to that specialist group. And then the chairs, the co-chairs, or the chair organize sort of the specialist group from then. So I was very, very fortunate. We were very fortunate within the ASG to have with us Phil Bishop, much loved co-chair and ASG family member up until 2020. And he was instrumental in terms of organizing the ASG. So we have an ASG secretariat, a very small group of people, global in scope. And from there on, we have sort of a multi-pronged approach and several pillars. So these pillars are comprised by the regional groups, the thematic working groups, the Amphibian Red List Authority, and the task forces. The regional groups focus on regional ASG activities. The thematic working groups focus on the Amphibian Conservation Action Plan. The Amphibian Red List Authority focuses on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. So this is our little secretariat strewn all over the world. You've already been sort of introduced to Sally and Amaël, and yours truly. We also have Jos Kielgast, who is based out of Denmark, Riv Marset-Greaves, who was instrumental in the development of the first part of Acap, and she's now residing in Honduras, and Jennifer Lutke, who is the Amphibian Red List Authority Coordinator, and she's based out of Washington, DC. So we're pretty spread around the world. So what does the ASG do now that you know kind of the structure, right? Let's talk about each one of these components. So we have the regional groups, the Conservation Action Plan, we have the ARLA, and we have the task forces. And each one of these focus on a particular prong. So the regional groups, there are currently 43 geographical units, and I call them units because not every regional group is comparable in terms of geographic size, scope, or anything like that. The way they were set up is completely historical. So we have regional groups that are comprised of countries, as in the case of Canada, ASG Canada, and we also have groups that are comprised of regions. So these are combinations of 2 or more countries where there's shared species or shared expertise. Each region is led by 1 to 2 chairs, co-chairs, and the regional groups are extremely diverse in just about everything. They have different strengths and different challenges. So they're very much sort of very focused on that particular region. And their remit is to identify the priorities for that individual region and organize the groups around these priorities. We're extremely fortunate to have as our ASG Canada co-chairs, Kristiina and Sara. They've been long supporters of ASG Canada, and we have them with us tonight, and they'll be able to tell you a little bit more about plans for ASG Canada moving forward at the end of the presentation. So our next pillar is the Amphibian Red List Authority, which is part of the ASG. It basically is the succession of the Global Amphibian Assessment Team. And we're responsible for the update and maintenance of the amphibian database on the IUCN Red List. It's comprised of a small core team of people working mostly from North America, with 1 other member in the UK. And they engage with volunteer regional coordinators around the globe that focus specifically on assessments. And they've been working on the Global Amphibian Assessment version 2. It's been a very long haul for the ARLA team because it's a lot of work to update these assessments, but they're very close to, oh, I have to admit someone, I'm sorry about that. Okay, and they're very close to completing the GAA too. So we should be seeing some papers and some more news in this regard. We come to the subject of this presentation, which is the Amphibian Conservation Action Plan, or ACAP for short. So ACAP was originally published in 2007, and a little bit of historical context. It came out of that 2005 Amphibian Conservation Summit that I spoke about. And it was basically followed by a 2015 version that was published as a living web-based document. And the idea behind ACAP is that it acts as a unified global strategy to protect amphibians, and that it is science-based and therefore provides guidance for amphibian conservation based on this evidence. So there's a number of different thematic working groups within the Amphibian Conservation Action Plan sort of community. And this has changed between the first ACAP and the 2007 and the 2015 versions. But we have kept the working groups from the 2015 version, and basically they cover threats and approaches to amphibian conservation. So for the purposes of the ACAP version that we're working on, we've divided them in 3 sort of broad categories. So we have threats, where we have climate change, ecotox, habitat loss, protection and management, infectious diseases, trade and sustainable use. We have species management, where we have conservation breeding, assisted reproductive technologies, genomics and translocations. And then we have informed decision-making, where we have communications and education, conservation planning, and surveys and monitoring of amphibians. Now, I should mention that this sort of makeup also reflects that the expertise that we currently have in-house within ASG. So if you see subjects that may not necessarily be reflected in this sort of arrangement, there's always scope for us to grow if you have interest in expertise and wish to propose something. And the last of our pillars is the ASG task forces. So these are groups of ASG members that have a specific taxonomic or thematic focus that is not the same as what we have in Acap right now. So the purpose behind these groups is to consolidate efforts so that we can build knowledge on the respective study groups or themes. And they are led by one or more coordinators. And we currently have one task force, which is the Atelopus task force. And we are extremely lucky to have here with us Luis Marin da Fonte, who is a coordinator of the Atelopus Survival Initiative and a member of the Atelopus Task Force. So the Atelopus Task Force is a branch of the ASG. It provides technical and scientific advice to the Atelopus Survival Initiative, which is a collaboration to bring harlequin toads back from the brink of extinction. And it seeks to facilitate and catalyze implementation of a harlequin toad conservation action plan. And with the ASI coordinator, it acts as the ASI's primary decision-making body. Now, ASG doesn't just have sort of this internal structure. We don't necessarily just talk just among ourselves, but we also have really tight and close connections with another two globally scoped networks, amphibian networks, and that is the Amphibian Survival Alliance and Amphibian ARC. So as we said, the ASG focuses on providing the scientific foundation so that we can inform amphibian conservation. But for example, Amphibian ARC focuses on protecting or safeguarding species that cannot exist in the current natural environment. So they focus on ex situ conservation needs assessments, planning, and capacity building. And the ASA it focuses on conserving amphibians through dynamic partnerships, and it leads on coordination, partnerships, outreach, and funding. Together, these three networks have a common vision, which is amphibians thriving in nature. And that sort of brings us together and allows us to work in a much more fluid way. We have sort of as you can see, we have very distinct foci, and every network collaborates and brings something different to the table. So you may be wondering, why should we update Acap since you have a 2007 version and you have a 2015 version? Well, the status of amphibians globally, unfortunately, has not improved. And in fact, threats are getting worse. This translates into loss of more populations and species, and there has been quite a bit of recent advances in knowledge influencing conservation decision-making, with some themes. So some themes seem to have a much quicker sort of turnover rate of information and knowledge. We need to have greater coordinated and integrated action, and to be able to involve a broader set of stakeholders. This would also help catalyze and guide priorities moving forward. And it's also really important for us that Acap works to encourage collaborations. So you might also ask yourself, what's different about this particular Acap? So the first and second Acap basically were used to some extent, especially, for example, the first Acap, the 2007 Acap, was used a lot in citations and publications. The second Acap was used to inform some donor priorities, so conservation organizations that support species conservation priorities. But before we started off, we said, well, why don't we try and figure out what people want to see in an updated Acap? So Sally, who is in the call now, was one of the leads in putting out this survey. And basically, we had the survey sent out in 2019. There were 153 respondents. Most of them came from zoo, aquaria, academic institutions, museums, and NGOs, with a much smaller, reduced number coming from governmental agencies, private entities, and individuals. There were several questions in this particular survey, but the one that I think is most relevant to this particular presentation is thinking about the most recent 2015 version of Acap. How do you think it needs to change to be most useful to you and your conservation organization? So you can see the responses from higher to lower there. Most people thought that global priorities need to be better expressed as manageable projects, that there needs to be a clear link to evidence of effectiveness of recommended interventions, that the document is easier to visualize. So people really wanted to see a PDF or a hard copy, that there's a clear outline of relationships between the actions and what we're asking for collaborations, that Acap is tracked across organizations. So we know what's happening, that we have an executive summary, clear links to our own organization priorities, and that there's a clear role in developing Acap priorities. So armed with this information, we basically said, oh, right, what can the current Acap look like so that it can help people that want to be informed and involved in amphibian conservation? So we also increased the diversity in authorship because it was important that different regional perspectives were captured in the development of Acap. And this is also to say that the diversity is not just within the amphibian specialist group, but we also had experts outside of the ASG that had expertise in specific themes. So for example, communication and education or habitat loss that were involved in the developing of respective chapters. We are having an open consultation process, which is going to be really key for us to be able to collect feedback from the broader amphibian conservation community so that the different views, perspectives, priorities, concerns are reflected in the current version, that we engage with diverse stakeholders. And this is something that we really want to be very proactive about, especially people or organizations that focus on work on the ground and organizations that focus on supporting work on the ground. And really key to this is that we're going to have 2 companion pieces this time around, because we realized, I mean, we talked around this in circles for years and we didn't know how to do it until finally our friend Phil Bishop said, well, why don't we do 2 things, 2 different documents? And that was like, oh, why didn't we think about that before? And it really, really helps a lot, because the status review is a more academic document. Basically, it's more of your typical, primary literature document that synthesizes the information. Whereas an implemented document is something that speaks to a much, much broader audience where you want to get that pickup. So the next steps for the status review very generally are this open consultation process that we talked about, after which we collect the feedback received and the chapters are revised by authors. At that point, a new draft is assembled and sent to the formal peer reviewers in the context of the IUCN process. And then the reviewed document comes back and the chapters are sent out to the respective authors, and then the final revision by chapter authors and compilation of a new and final version. This final version is sent to graphic designer, and then that version is sent for final corrections. And at that point, it's minor edits. We're not talking about major changes. And then we get sort of like the blessings of IUCN to launch the status review. So once the status review is available, the next step would be the implemented document, which is the sort of like more practical approach. And I should mention that the status review is going to be a fairly hefty document. We were looking at around 400 pages worth of information. That's a lot. So we're going to have to take, the key points from that and distill it into 28 to 30 pages tops, because that's one thing that we need to make sure that this document is short enough and informative enough that it will have pickup outside of the academic community, but it will be available in PDF format, but it's free to download. And it will distill the key priorities for each chapter in a very user-friendly language, in a very graphic way as well, full of photos, infographics, very visually appealing. And initially, at least, we're thinking of getting it translated into 4 languages. So these are the 3 official IUCN languages, well, English, French, and Spanish. And thanks to the generous contribution of Amaël's institution, Chinese as well. And really, really key for us, this document is going to be really helpful to monitor and evaluate uptake of the ACAP. So a broad strategy for implementation is to use ACAP to leverage support for amphibian conservation. And we're going to be contacting conservation implementers and donors to assess their interest and investment in ACAP, which is why it's so important that they have the ability to provide input during the open consultation process. I should also mention that not all chapters are equally relevant to all regions. Some regions will find some chapters more relevant to their reality, others not so much. So regions are encouraged to assess what is relevant to their particular geographical context. And regions are also encouraged to help track action in the respective region. Obviously, the regional folk know much better than us what's happening and who are the key players in particular areas of the country or of a region, and they know who to engage. So they're going to be really, really key to help track action. And with that, that's sort of like the ASG global side of things. And I would like to invite ASG Canada, and I can continue rolling the slides if you'd like. Sara and Chris. Oh, can't hear you, Chris. You're muted.
Okay, yes, thank you. Yeah, if you can roll the slides, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, okay.
We just have Sara and I just have a few slides in the end of this wonderful presentation on ASG Canada. As you heard, ASG Canada is one of 43 regional groups within the global ASG. We've been largely inactive for the past couple of years, but now we emerging from hibernation, and we quite excited to be part of this next cycle of ASG for the next 4 years, and particularly to participate in the review and adaptation of the ACAP to the Canadian context. So what I see as one of our main roles is to act as a liaison between the global ASG and CHS and other amphibian conservation organizations here. We have some main objectives, sort of general objectives, which are going to be shown on this slide. The first one is to expand our understanding of the causes of amphibian declines in Canada, continue to document amphibian diversity in Canada and how it's changing, and thirdly, clarify protection, management, and habitat restoration needs for Canadian amphibians. So these are kind of a broad objectives and or goals within, and we have activities and actions that are more specific, and Sara will take over for the last 2 slides and also tell you how you can get involved.
Thank you, Chris. Next slide, please. So one of the first things that we always do a call for is the need for us to increase our membership. And so membership is very much relying on experts in the field. And I've just put up a list there. These are our current ASG members. And so you can see that we have representation from across Canada. And we've even had representation for people who've been traveling and working abroad. So the thing that we do know is that we have a 4-year period of time to determine our priority actions. And so setting out those goals will be really important. Probably the biggest one, and the one that we have a call for action to, is our role in reviewing the ACAP. And then after that process, developing a Canadian specific needs. So remember when we were learning that there's these two-stage documents. We want to make sure that we have usable information for Canadian practitioners and conservation specific to our Canadian needs. And of course, we have very strong collaborations and a lot of overlap between membership and expertise that are in other working groups. CHS is a really notable one. In addition to that would be the Kasiwik Amphibian Reptile Subcommittee. And then I would say too that we've had a really strong relationship with the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. And there's probably other groups out there too that we could collaborate with, and we would be very interested in that as well. If you could change the slide, thank you. So you might be asking how you could get involved, and the process of becoming a member might just start by reaching out to Chris or I. Also, you've noticed in the chat, there's a lot of links that have been put up there, so you can review online significant amount of information about ASG in general. We can also provide information for signing up, and I can give you those links as well. And one of the things too that we try to emphasize is there's a lot of different ways in which you can contribute and a lot of different levels of participation. Sometimes it's about having an expertise that we can reach out to you when needed, or direct people to you, or you can weigh in. But then there's much more active ways you can get involved as well. And so one of the things that we would really like to do is we have the thematic sections for the ACAP. And what we'd really want to do is figure out who could help contribute to individual thematic areas based on their expertise. And then Chris and I will organize the complete review to go back to ASG to make sure that our perspective is actually included within those documents to the best of our ability. And so the idea of having some work sprees to figure out how to develop some tasks for individuals who are willing to volunteer their time. And one of the things that was brought to my attention, particularly from, Ariadne, is that there's potential for us to develop an authorship and to publish a paper based on Canadian needs. And so I think if there's individuals out there who would like to participate in this way, we would very much welcome that dialogue as well. So this is my recommendation, that if you do not see your name on our ASG list, but you're like, but I thought I was a member, it's likely that you filled out one or neither of the two requiring documents and we can update you. Or you might be sitting there thinking that you would like to get involved, and we welcome expertise, absolutely. And I think actually that is one more slide where we are now just really open to open up questions to our complete panel. Lots of different people that can contribute to different perspectives. And I'd just like to say thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I just wanted to add that this would not have been possible without the support of Detroit Zoological Society, the Amphibian Survival Alliance, and Nanjing Forestry University. So thank you very much to all these folks, and Louise Marine da Fonte, who helped with one of the graphs here. Thank you, Louise.
We can open up the floor to questions or comments. You're welcome to unmute yourselves. Ariadne, if you want to stop sharing, I can kind of full screen you guys. Unless there's content, we can share it if we've got some other stuff. So yeah, just pop your hand up, or yeah, maybe pop your hand up. That'll make it a little easier for me to find. Do you want me to bring Amaël and Sally in as well? Are you guys comfortable to come into the spotlight? Yes. We shall find out. All right. Okay. Leah, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I just want to thank you all for your presentations. That was great. I was wondering, do we know when the new ACAP is going to be formalized?
Okay, so this is a multi-step process. And we just sort of calculated the number of weeks that we've assigned to each one of those steps in that flowchart. And we're being, I think, let's say, between optimistic and really wanting it to happen by August.
But the review will start earlier, right? So when would the first review?
Okay, so we will be uploading the document for open consultation on the 28th of February. And that's the beginning of that 4-week period for broad feedback. After that, we'll get all the comments, all the feedback that we collate during that period and send it out to authors. Authors will have another 4 weeks to accommodate those comments. And then we collate everything back again into one version to send out to the peer reviewers. Peer reviewers again have another 4 weeks. And again, goes back to the authors. So most of these periods will be like 4 weeks, except for the graphic layout, which is going to be really involved and it's going to take a long time. So we're estimating around 6 weeks for that. Yeah, so roughly all in all, it's going to be around August if everything goes according to plan.
Was that February 28th you said that the document would become available?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 4 weeks starting February 28th to get as many people involved with the review.
Yeah, if you want to, even if you're not a member of the ASG Canada, if you want to send us an email today, I put the email address in the chat there, or just you can email us personally, Sara or I, if you want to be involved or you think you may want to be involved, we would be happy to have you on a list.
So I think that might answer Damon's question, but let us know if it's not. The question from the chat was, if someone is interested in joining or inquiring about joining ASG Canada, how would you go about that? So is that to send an email to asgcanada@gmail.com, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Sorry, just scanning chat. Chat has been busy. There's lots of links in there that
and incidentally, we want to thank Leah as well, because she's been one of the core authors, right? So thank you very much for your expertise, Leah.
And you don't, as Sara mentioned, you don't, if you want to be involved in this review, you don't have to review the entire 400-page document. Like there may be a small part or some item that you have particular knowledge or interested in, and you can just review that part and we'll put it all together. So don't be intimidated by 400 pages in March.
Yes, no, I should have actually mentioned that. We're not expecting anyone to read the 400 pages. Obviously, if people want to do that, we're absolutely welcome to do it, but we're very cognizant of the fact that, people have lives. But if you have expertise in one particular theme and you are able to contribute to that theme, that would be wonderful.